It has been a long day, and you might be seeing double for other reasons, but if you're looking up here and saying, am I seeing double? Yes, we are identical twin brothers. I want to get some of the twin questions out of the way right at the beginning before we get into the presentation. Ryan is 45 minutes older than I am, so there's that. He likes to tell me that from time to time, but I am taller than he is, so I'll always have that over him. A lot of people ask us if I, hit you, does he feel the pain? I don't know, go ahead and smack him upside the head and I'll tell you if I feel it. Those are all of our twin jokes. Thank you for the pity laughs, appreciate it. Alrighty. So today we want to talk about how to thrive in the digital age. And more importantly, we want to kind of unpack some ideas around how you and your companies can use digital to be your competitive edge, right? To beat the competition, to move the needle, and to make meaningful impact in growing your business. And so at Fratzke Media, we do that a lot of different ways, but a lot of it is through process, and a lot of it is through understanding the digital ecosystem, how it comes together, and so we'll talk about some of those things today. Let me tell you a little bit about the journey that we're going to go on. So we're going to talk about the digital ecosystem, and we've heard bits and pieces of that today. We're going to bring it all together in one cohesive picture and tell you what the digital ecosystem is. We're going to talk about evolving consumer behaviors. And remember, when we're talking about evolving consumer behaviors, try to check maybe any misconceptions you have at the door and think about how you interact with brands. We'll talk about that just a little bit. 3, we'll talk about how companies are reacting to those new consumer behaviors. From there, we'll talk about the opportunity in your space, in the med tech space, and we'll wrap things up with how you can take action. So from start to finish, hopefully you can take away some nuggets today that are going to help you in your work. Here are some of the companies that we've worked with over time or are working with currently at Fratzke Media. We're a digital marketing consultancy, so that's a little bit differently. We think of ourselves differently than an agency. And here's the big difference. An agency, by definition, you're giving someone an agency on your behalf to go do things. So we often think about this. You can catch a fish for somebody and they'll eat for a night, right? That's an agency. It's an all-you-can-eat sushi buffet. You pay them money, you're going to get to keep eating, right? But the second you walk away from that agency relationship, the average agency relationship is about 2 years, right? So the first 6 months is all wind up, the last 6 months is all wind down. So you really only get a year of impact from that relationship. But oftentimes when you walk away from that relationship, the agency kind of keeps all the strategy and all those results. A consultancy is a little bit differently. We want to teach people how to fish. So if you feed somebody for a night, they'll eat for that night, but if you teach them how to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. So that's kind of the difference between an agency and a consultancy, and fundamentally how we think at Fratzke Media. All right, Ryan, I'm going to hand this over to you. I'm going to let him do the heavy lifting today. He's a lot funnier than I am. So give it up for Ryan, everybody. I'm going to step up here since James pointed out how he's taller than me. I've got the bird's eye view, which is great. I wrote all of James's jokes if you liked them. If you didn't like his jokes, James wrote all of his jokes. So I promise we're not as funny as we're coming across right now. It's really working out with this room very nicely. But today, I want to talk about digital strategy and how you can make it your competitive edge. And really, first to do that, understand that, we have to understand the digital ecosystem. And I know we've got a med tech group here, so hopefully you'll appreciate this metaphor that I'm going to unpack for the next couple of minutes. When you think about an ecosystem and what it is, just outside of the digital ecosystem, it's a living and non-living elements sort of working together, right? And the digital ecosystem is very similar. There's different components that are working together in real time. So here are the basic things that are happening in the digital ecosystem. You have consumers, and for some of you, you might be thinking, well, does he mean B2C or B2B? Generally, right now, I'm talking about both. We'll share some B2C and some B2B stats in just a second. So, are we marketing to the patients or to the practice? We'll talk about some of those things. And then you have companies who are trying to get consumers to buy products. And in the digital ecosystem, those two things are connected by what I like to call connectors. Now, it would be nice if it was this simple. It was just you and your company selling products to customers, and there was no one else in your way of being the most successful brand. But of course, there are competitors, right? So we have to actually, a great point was made earlier that there's 11 hours of media being consumed by adults on any given day. So we have to compete with our competitors to get those consumers' attention. All right, so let me unpack this ecosystem a little bit more. So I talked about connectors, and I want to talk a little bit about digital platforms, digital marketing platforms, places where companies spend time and places where consumers spend time. And I just want to ask the room, in 2019, how many different digital marketing platforms do you think exist out there today? And these can include social media platforms, SaaS platforms, either on the customer or on the company side of things. How many platforms?
20,000.
20,000. Who said that? It's a very generous guess. Not yet. You said 100, right? Did you? So it's somewhere between 100 and 20,000.
Lots.
Lots, right? All right. Here's a graph. It's very hard to read. Why? Because there's over 7,000 different marketing platforms that exist out there today. If I was to zoom in on this, you would see logos like Google and Facebook, MailChimp if you use that for email, right? So there's thousands and thousands of different platforms. It's just like a real ecosystem. You know, we had kind of this tree on the other slide. There's things that you see in an ecosystem like, wow, that's a beautiful tree. And then there's things that go beyond the surface, and a lot of this is that beyond the surface stuff that we don't necessarily see with our naked eyes every day. But at Frasca Media, we have a principle. We try to keep things simple, right? Simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. So you can really just boil these down into 8 channels, 8 succinct channels that you can leverage when you're trying to communicate with consumers in the digital ecosystem. So you have your website, right? And that can include things like e-commerce or different pieces. SEO, which is search engine optimization, which was very well covered today. Content marketing, local search, which is a very niche piece of search, but also very important. Someone talked about Google My Business earlier. I thought that was awesome. That's a pretty niche piece of it. Email marketing, digital ads, social media, and reputation management. So these are really those connectors that I'm talking about. So let's talk about the next part of the ecosystem. Consumers, right? Each and every one of us are consumers. We're also part of companies. But do you know how many people are actually going to Google first or going to search first when they have a question about something? Does anyone have an idea of what percentage of people? Almost 90%, right? 87% of people go to search engines first. And what are they going for? Well, let's see. There's been a really big increase, an 80% increase in the number of searches that include the phrase, should I? Right? Literally asking Google for advice. It's a scary idea. Does anyone have the Amazon Echo with Alexa in their house? No? Okay. Yes, one of the biggest retail companies in the world is hell-bent on having microphones in our living rooms so that we can ask these should I questions and they can gather that kind of data. But it gets a little bit scarier, and as a father of a 4-year-old daughter, the world that we live in is amazing to me because people are starting to ask questions with the phrase me, my, and I, right? So should I, what should I get? And they're making it kind of all about them and their lives and helping. The search engine is actually literally helping them make decisions because what's a search engine all about? It's about connecting people with questions to the right answers as quickly as possible. All right, so for the B2B side of things, because we talk to a lot of companies that say, hey, you know what? I have had this business for 20 years. I invested in my website in the 80s. It looks like it. I totally get it. Maybe, well, 80s doesn't make sense. The 90s. And I don't need to invest in marketing. My sales continue to grow. Well, on the B2B side of things, people that are in charge of the buying decision, the purchasers, are going and doing about 8 to 12 online searches before interacting with a brand. So they're going in there doing their due diligence. You've all seen Yelp for restaurants today. There are websites out there today that are like the Yelp for SaaS, or the Yelp for PR firms, or the Yelp for marketing firms. So there are reputation sites that exist across the board. So everyone, whether you're on the B2C side or the B2B side, is going online for their answers.
How do you define interacting? What does that mean? Closing a sale?
Yeah, so what they're doing here in this instance is this is kind of a summed up result of they've either gone on and done a search for a specific keyword, they've gone and looked at your social profiles, they've clicked on the 2 or the 3 results and maybe looked at some different competitors, but they're interacting with your brand before they actually go and fill out that lead form or make that phone call. Okay, so we see that consumers in this ecosystem are going digital first, and I don't think anyone's surprised about that. So we all work for companies. You'd have to assume companies have digital strategies, right? All companies, they have to have one because the trends are clear.
Well, no. 49% of businesses do not have a clearly defined digital marketing strategy or digital strategy. So what you have is a group of companies that are interacting in this digital ecosystem, and they might be doing things ad hoc, right? Our experience has been, we started with enterprise brands. So we started working with the Walmarts and the Whole Foods and the Patagonias and the Dollar Trees of the world. And you know what? They have like 6 different marketing teams for all their different departments. Walmart has a pharmacy marketing department. They have a pickup marketing department. But for smaller companies, it's very clear that the strategies aren't in place, and it's making it very difficult to compete. Well, I'm going to ruin that joke. Hold on. But MedTech, these are smart people. They really have to be on board with digital, right? Not necessarily. So a survey done by Bain, another consulting group out there, took a look and saw that digital aspirations and confidence in MedTech are high with MedTech executives. So about 50% of MedTech executives say that digital is their top priority, which I thought was actually surprisingly low. Only 50% thought that digital was a top priority. 80% are very confident in their ability to achieve their digital goals, but below 5% are actually achieving their goals that they've set, right? So there's sort of these loose, weak marketing strategies out there, and they're not executing against them. Now this is kind of MedTech adjacent. We'll talk about pharma a little bit, but this was a study done from Gartner and L2. And what they wanted to get a sense for was how are pharmaceutical companies adopting basic best practices for web design? So things like mobile or different user interfaces, best practices. And what they found was, except for like your typical hamburger menu, most pharma websites are not adopting best practices, right? So they don't have a well-optimized mobile website. They aren't using things like jump back to the top, which you see a lot of times in mobile websites. You can hit that button and it takes you to the top. They're not using interactive search on their website. So what I'm trying to point out here is that consumers are looking at things from a very digital-first perspective, but companies are typically very slow to move and capitalize on these things. And the data continues to back it up. Dell did a survey of 4,000 companies and tried to assess where they were on this spectrum from digital leader to digital laggard. And what you can see is over 70% of these companies are falling behind, right? Only 5% are considered digital leaders. The next closest one here is 23% as digital adopters. So these are people who are very closely following the leaders. But the rest of the companies are just kind of sitting back, thinking, well, maybe we'll invest, maybe we won't. So what is the opportunity? Let's come back to that ecosystem that we were defining a couple of minutes ago. It actually gets a little bit more complex, right? Before I said there's just consumers, connectors, and competitors, but actually that's your company right there, that little purple dot. You've got all these competitors, some are bigger, some are smaller, and then you have the consumer who has so many different ways to connect with brands today, and maybe your product isn't the only thing they're online for. Maybe they're checking NFL scores. If you're a Steelers fan, you're thinking about just, signing off for the rest of the season. Any other Steeler fans in the house?
Go Ravens.
Thanks, James. Go Ravens.
Flip the table.
Yeah, no, seriously. Jumped off it. Okay. Anyway, so it's a close game. So you have a lot of different people trying to compete. And what I want to say is for companies that are smaller, that are in that mid-size or small-size business, or maybe you're a startup in the med tech world that's just kind of getting started, I really think your opportunity for growth and success is to start plotting out that digital marketing strategy, because your competitors aren't doing it in a meaningful way. They're not close enough to the trends of what's happening from a Google algorithm standpoint or from a social standpoint, or from an email marketing standpoint. The data just shows that they're not planning things out in a way that's going to make them as successful. Now, what they have going for them, they have a lot more marketing dollars, but if you actually go through and plot out a plan, you can be more efficient with your marketing dollars than maybe they are, and start getting some marketing share, and they get closer to the customer. I worked for the Walt Disney Company for 4 years, and I picked up on some of their animation techniques, so it's a good one there, check that out. Yeah, pretty sleek. All right, so how do you go about building this strategy? Well, it takes time, it takes patience. At Fratzke, the way that we like to do it with all of our customers is really starting off with that digital audit, okay? We'll dig into this a little bit more in a few seconds, but this is our process that we like to push our sort of guide our customers through, right? So we start with our comprehensive audit, Then we actually build out the strategy, because now that we've done an audit, we understand what are the different channels that are effectively going to work. Then we'll start plotting out the tactical campaigns, and with those campaigns, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but they have to have KPIs. You know, you don't want to just be throwing, it's okay to experiment, but you want to have a sense for what does success look like. Reporting and insights is extremely critical, because you know, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it really happen? If you set off a marketing campaign and you have no way of measuring success, why did you do it, right? Did it really work? And then you want to get that data back from your reporting and really think about what are the strategic optimizations that we can make, and then go back to the drawing board with your campaigns. Everything should be very, you should be reiterating and iterating on top of your strategies constantly to make sure that you have that competitive edge. So at Fratzke, we do a lot of talk about this entire process, but today I don't have that much time. I could go on for the rest of the day, but I want to zero in on comprehensive audit and strategic planning and really just talk about what are some of the things that you can do to get started from a strategic planning standpoint. And before I do that, let me just ask, because I'm going to survey the room as we go through this, who here is personally responsible for the marketing strategy of your company? Dan? Okay, perfect. Okay, great. How many of you fall in that boat that I was showing earlier of either are you on the side of the fence that has a marketing strategy or doesn't? So let me just ask, how many of you have a documented marketing strategy? Okay, all right. So I won't tell you the results, everyone who's looking at me, but not as many hands went up. Okay, there were a few hands that stayed down. All right, so when we're thinking about our marketing strategy, when we're thinking about what's going to be in our audit, we want to keep this model in mind. We call it GHOST. It stands for goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics, right? People get these things mixed up all the time, but it is very important that you have this documented and you walk through this framework when you're thinking about laying out that digital strategy. So goals, that's your big idea, your desired future result. Objectives, I think, is the most important thing you can do. Objectives have to be measurable, and they have to be timely, right? So if you're going to launch a marketing campaign, you have to have a sense for what sort of outcome are you trying to drive and what amount of time, right? And that helps you actually gauge what success looks like. Strategies, those are the sort of the high-level things that you're going to do to actually achieve that goal. So when I'm thinking about strategies, I'm thinking, okay, are we going to leverage the SEO channel to drive more traffic? Are we going with an organic strategy? Or, you know, Stu Atkins earlier talked a lot about PPC. Are we going to go with a paid strategy? Or are we going to do a little combination of both, right? Those are the strategies that you can deploy. And then when you get into tactics, that's really the brass tacks. So how are we going to go about doing it, right? If we're going to do a content campaign, where is that content going to live? What is the call to action? You know, how are we going to gauge success? Is it drive leads? Is it email subscriptions? Just keeping those sort of things in mind. All right, so now when you're auditing your organization, Frasca Media has a proprietary audit. I'm going to switch slides here. Has a proprietary audit where we look at 236 different data points, right, across the 8 channels and across these 4 dimensions. I really consider this the building blocks of a successful marketing organization, right? So in your audit, you need to look at the right people on board, right? Do we need to make a hire internally from a marketing standpoint? One thing that we see a lot with mid-size to bigger businesses is that they're actually trending towards bringing marketing positions internal, right? So it used to be, can we outsource, can we outsource, can we outsource? And we're starting to actually see a lot of teams across the board starting to actually bring in, either building out an in-house agency or building out an internal marketing team and bringing things in-house. So does your team have the right people on board? Platforms. Are you using the right sort of tools, right? Are you using an out-of-the-box CRM for your website like Weebly? Okay, well that's maybe not as good as going to more of an industry best practice. For example, you have a lot of great tools. Like WordPress is a fantastic CRM. Or James, you're probably thinking of a couple more if you want to throw them out there.
I think you mean to say CMS too.
What did I say?
CRM.
Did I say CRM?
Yeah. Yes, this is the nice thing about having
this
this
is why we have
in the audience. I can correct them, and nobody thinks twice about it.
Yeah. Well, CRM is different. That's like a Salesforce. But yes, okay, perfect. Processes. So are your processes documented? How are you going about actually executing your strategies? And then partners. Partners, this is really important to us. We think that everyone, although you're bringing things in-house, you should have strong marketing partners in place. Because if you're in charge of your business, if you're the president, if you're the CEO, if you're the founder, you really want to be working on your business, not in your business. And a lot of times I see people that are running $10, $20 million businesses that are trying to go with the marketing DIY approach. I think when you go with DIY, you tend to DIW, do it wrong, right? So you want to really make sure that you have the right partners in place. It could be an agency, it could be a consultancy, but it's all about making sure that you have a sounding board and a strategic partner who has been there before and has run successful marketing campaigns that can point you in the right direction. And for all of these metrics, you want to give yourself a score. So if you see yourself having sort of an A group of people, are you C on platforms? Are you D on process? Where are the areas that you need to improve? Like I said, at Fratzke, we look at 236 different data points. It doesn't have to be that challenging if you've never done this before. Just kind of getting in there and having a sense of where you're at can be very helpful. All right, so now that you know your people, your platforms, your processes, you also really want to make sure you know your consumer, and you need to document your consumer persona, okay? So this is actually an example of things that we give our clients when we have had a chance to interview their consumers, interview their teams, look at their data. We'll build out who is your consumer. From a digital perspective, where do they hang out, right? I cannot tell you how many first calls we have where someone says, well, we need a social media strategy. We need to be on Facebook. And then we go and we look at the data and we see, well, your consumers really aren't leveraging Facebook. It's not the right audience. It's not the right demographic, right? So you want to build out this persona so that you know your consumers' demographics, their behaviors, their interests, their motivations, and the potential challenges. And what this helps you do is understand which one of those channels we were talking about earlier are going to be the most helpful for you to actually interact with your customer. Now, once you understand the customer, you got to know their journey, right? How do they like to consume information? All the way through the phases, right? So if we're looking at awareness, consideration, decision, loyalty, what are the different sort of channels that we should be leveraging all the way across the board to make sure we're talking to that customer at the right time, at the right place, to help drive the outcome that we're looking for. And it doesn't always have to be like a very transactional sell. It could be we just want to have a conversation with them and get them to fill out a lead form. But being aware of that journey, we actually will build out columns for each of these and put the demographics that we build out, the consumer personas that we build out, and think about, even before we build the strategy, how do we anticipate these people interacting with our website or with our different digital platforms so that we have that information available. And I think you guys should do that too. If you don't have a roadmap plotted out, that's always a great idea. This is just a very high-level visualization. After we know, do we have the right people in our audit, our platforms, our processes, our partners? After we know our consumer and how we anticipate they're going to interact with our brand, we start plotting out what you could describe as a digital transformation or a transformation of the marketing strategy. What are the steps we're going to take month over month for the next 6, 12, 24, 36 months so that we know what sort of progress we're working towards? It doesn't have to be extremely challenging. What I'm going to show you next, though, is the hard part, right? So this is sort of the mile wide, but then as you start to implement these things, right, so you start getting more people involved, more people and processes involved, you do want to start getting a little bit more specific, and so you should have a prioritized action plan. What this looks at is very specifically, what is our actionable path forward? The tasks that you put on this, it could be on a spreadsheet, it could be in Asana, it could be in Monday.com. There's a lot of different project management tools out there. But the tasks that you have in here should be actionable, timely, and assigned to specific folks so you can start executing. All right, so here are my takeaways. Even though consumers think digital first, most companies do not have a meaningful strategy. Number 2, digital can be your competitive edge if you have the right people, platforms, processes, and partners in place. And then number 3, finally here, what we've seen in the data is consumers are thinking digital first and companies are slow to move. So auditing and documenting your digital marketing strategy is the best place to get started to making digital your competitive edge. I know this can seem stressful, but the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So if you don't have a marketing strategy, don't get stressed out about it. Just start taking those steps forward like we showed you, these little baby steps. So you can crawl, you can walk, you can run. All right, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please let us know.